So I get to work one day, and I see everybody's rushing towards the conference room. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there was a mandatory meeting. I have to get there as soon as possible because, the conference room is going to fill up very quickly. So I get to the conference room. I get to the corner, and I kind of get ready for the meeting to start. Slowly, the room starts to pack. I mean, there's 100, 150 people on the same floor, and it's mandatory. Everyone has to be there. So the room starts to get packed. All the chairs are filled. People are pressing up on the walls, sitting on the vents, and people are starting to huddle around me, and it's getting really tight. All of a sudden, the CFO walks in. Now, I'm a junior analyst at this time, so I really don't know what's going on. So he's there, and he's talking about last year's revenues, and he's talking about how we did a poor job pretty much as a company, and he's starting to get heated, and everyone's starting to get quiet. As you know, when managers start getting angry, start screaming, people start speaking less, so you can hear a pin drop in the room. All you can hear is just him getting angry. So as he's speaking, all of a sudden, I mean, it's early morning, I realize, I have to go to the bathroom. Like my stomach's turning, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to go to the bathroom. And so you can imagine, he's angry, the room's packed, and I'm in a wheelchair. And it's a power wheelchair, so it's not like I could just roll out. I would have to move people out of the way. People are surrounding me, so no one can even see me at this point. But I have to go. And he's angry. All of a sudden, at this point, I swear it had to be the perfect timing. He said, I remember he goes, and what do you guys have to say for yourselves? And at that point, I turned on my wheelchair at the exact same time. So all you hear is, and he goes, what the hell was that? So everyone just turns towards me. So now the room is divided. It's split. It's a clear line of sight between me and the CFO. And he's never seen me before because I'm not important. And he's yelling, and everyone's looking at me and looking at him. I'm looking at them, and I'm looking at him. So everyone's just looking around at how are we going to react to this? So I have my hands up, in my head, I'm explaining something to him, but I'm not, words aren't coming out. I'm just right? So then he puts his hands up. I swear, he puts his hands up and he goes, I'm so sorry. It's like, if you need to leave, please go ahead. And I'm like, all right, so I kind of turn out, and, you see people jumping on the table, trying to get out of my way, the Red Sea's parting, and I'm rolling out of this conference room, and everyone's just mumbling. You can just hear the mumbling behind you because what just happened. And I get out to the bathroom, and I had that Thug Life music going on in my mind. And I was like, man, I just owned my CFO. And I was like, maybe it's not so bad to be in a wheelchair. I think it's you can have some perks that come with that. So it was a pretty cool, funny experience for me.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Muhammad.
My name is Amer.
My name is Sim.
Today we have a very good friend of ours, Omer Zaman. He's here to help create awareness for Muslims with disabilities. He volunteers for an organization named MUHSEN. Omer, Jazakallah khair for being here.
Wa yakum, Jazakallah khair for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Welcome.
Yeah, I mean, just in my story, just kind of wanted to, it's sometimes what happens is that, even people with disabilities kind of forget sometimes that they have disabilities, right? When I'm sitting there looking at my CFO, I'm thinking like anybody else would think, but the lens he's looking at me from was completely different. And I think, the most important thing today I want to kind of talk about along with MUHSEN is just perspective, is how the community views us as people with disabilities and special needs, and how we view ourselves. I think it's very important to kind of touch upon that, and it's something that is very near and dear to me. But it's
so you volunteer for MUHSEN?
Yeah, it's an organization that was actually started by Sheikh Omer Zaman, who is actually the Imam of Valley Ranch Masjid down in Texas, and it's actually close to the Dallas area. So MUHSEN actually stands for Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs, right? That's the acronym for MUHSEN. And the idea is to create inclusion within the Muslim community, awareness within the Muslim community, trying to get people with special needs integrated back into the Muslim community. And it's actually, prior to this, is important to know, I didn't really work with any other organization. It's kind of this is so near to me that when I started and I heard about it, I said, this is something I need to do, because I actually didn't always have a disability. I have a form of muscular dystrophy that developed as I got older.
For those who don't know, can you explain that?
Sure, yeah. I have a muscular dystrophy known as Miyoshi Myopathy. Now, I'm going to get scientific on you right now.
It's a form of distal muscular dystrophy.
Exactly. Sim did his homework before he came. So it's a form of distal muscular dystrophy. It's called dysferlinopathy. So what dysferlin is chemicals. When your muscles break down, it builds those muscles back up. So when speaking to my doctors, neurologists, they told me that when I hit adolescence, that chemical stopped being developed by my body. So every muscle that I had built up at that point started to break down. But as Sim pointed out, it's a distal. So it started off with my calves and my forearms. So it didn't immediately affect all the muscles in my body at one time. It kind of just systematically shut down as it got closer to the core of my body. Alhamdulillah, it doesn't affect my heart or my face, anything of the core of my body, my abdomen, my back muscles are alhamdulillah still strong, but it was all in my limbs. So I actually ended up in a wheelchair. I'm going to date myself now. when I was 27, 28. I'm 31 now. So, but it started off from using a cane to a walker, and I slowly got to the point where I had to use a wheelchair. So the reason it's important that I wanted to work with MUHSEN is because of the fact that I never even thought about people that had disabilities until I became someone that had a disability. And I'm not going to say that I always had that thought and that compassion towards Muslim brothers and sisters or anybody, not just Muslims, but that had any type of special need. It was just the story of MUHSEN and how I came to know about them was very interesting. Very briefly, I went to their dinner in September of 2015. And I went there when someone told me, Sheikh Omer Zaman's talking, Mufti Kamani is talking. And I was like, all right, this is great. I love those guys. I didn't even know what it was about until someone pointed it out. It's for people with disabilities. I was like, this is a hat trick. I get food, great lectures, and, it's for people with disabilities. So I'm going to go. And I swear, I went there with the mentality that they're going to give me money or something. Like, walking like, hey, this guy has a disability, pay him, go buy a wheelchair, buy something else. It was literally like what I could take from MUHSEN. Like that was my mentality going in. And there were such great speakers the speakers I referred to are great in their own right, and they're amazing shuyukh and ulama, but the people that I never heard of, I never seen, and majority people have never heard of, were the people that really got to me. They're people that were directly, like aunts and uncles, parents, brothers and sisters, that were directly impacted with disabilities, and their speeches were literally, it shook me a lot, where when I left the dinner, it was not what can MUHSEN do for me, is what can I do for MUHSEN. And since November of 2015, I officially started working with them on various projects, and alhamdulillah, I'm still part of Team MUHSEN in Chicago, and I'm proud to be part of that. They're doing a lot of great things. I'm actually probably one of the least active volunteers. There's people that are doing immense amount of work. I'm talking about across the U.S. I do everything pretty much from home.
So what does MUHSEN exactly do for people with disabilities now?
They do. They're trying to. As I mentioned, it started in 2014, so they're trying to build, a lot of these programs up. So very quickly, they established a couple of Sunday school programs here in Chicagoland as well as in Houston. They have been using their resources to help during big events like ISNA, Mass ICNA, as well as Bayana Story Night, where they get people that can come and do sign language for those that have hearing impairments. They can get babysitting for children with special needs, so that parents can actually sit and enjoy and learn the ilm, because with children that have autism, sometimes parents cannot leave them alone and they need special care. So then parents will not necessarily have the opportunity to go to lectures or go to these big events like ISNA and ICNA, because they're constantly worried about their children. So MUHSEN is trying to provide that type of convenience. Also, one of the biggest projects I feel is the Masjid certification program. Now, what that is it's on their website, but they're trying to get all the masjid MUHSEN certified. Now, there's two things that help, in my opinion. This is my own opinion on how this will help, inshallah, the community. Is number one, it will help build accommodations for people with special needs, and number two, it will help the community understand the needs of their community. So the masjid will understand, whoa, this is how many people that have disabilities within our community. This is how many people need certain accommodations, and I think it'll be an eye-opening project for the Muslim Ummah across the U.S. And a project I'm working on specifically is just needs assessments, where it takes 1 minute. There's a link on the website, and it's also on Twitter and Facebook. You fill it out, and then that gives us an understanding, and you can rank your community 1 through 10, and on accommodations, on programs, things of that nature, and it gives us a sense So when we do approach these masajid, we can say, this is the voice of your community. This is what they're saying about your masjid. And this is what they're saying about your program. And this is how you can improve. And that is data they can't deny. And I think that's a very interesting and there's a lot of potential in that project. That's also one of many. Alhamdulillah, there's a Best Buddies program where they take all these beautiful children, mashallah, here in Chicago to Navy Pier, where they got children with special needs and they paired them up with other people and that were volunteers and took a bus to Navy Pier and they had a blast. You know, you can see these pictures on the website, on Facebook, as well as, you know, on Twitter. You can follow them. Alhamdulillah, they're just doing so much in the volunteer. It's all volunteer work for the most part. I mean, there's a couple of employees that are full time. You know, the director, Juhi Tahir, who's on the website, who, mashallah, I really enjoy working with. She's just helped me so much. As I said, I never worked with the organization before, so she's really understood that I was wet behind the ears and I had a lot to grow, and she definitely helped with that. So MUHSEN, mashallah, is growing. It's going to continue to grow. I have faith that there's barakah in this organization, inshallah, and I hope that everyone will either visit their site and try to volunteer, or at least visit their booths when they're at certain events. If you're there, you should definitely visit and stop by and talk, inshallah.
What do you think is the lack of in the Muslim community in regards to people with disabilities? To be honest, I mean, besides the handicap spaces where everyone parks in, I mean, you don't really hear much about it. You know,
I try to be a little bit more objective when it comes to that. As I mentioned, I was diagnosed at 17. So at that time, I used to get so mad because I wasn't always in a wheelchair. I remember one time I was parking at a local masjid and I didn't have a cane at this time, but I had the placard, the handicap placard, because I was formally diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. And one of the parking lot volunteers, he started yelling at me, like, you use your grandmother's placard, you're parking here, it's for adults and people. And I'm trying to explain to him. And I was so I didn't want to get into a fight, so I moved my car. So that kind of validated his point, but I don't want to fight with him. He honestly thought that he won that argument. I went home and I was so mad, and I told my dad, and my dad was like, tell me who he is, like he's about to go beat him up or something. It was kind of 50-50. I was like, I don't know what would happen to my dad. So I was like, I'm not going to tell you, right? That was pretty big. But then later on, once I got a cane, even a police officer, I'm born in 1984, and those placards, they actually punch in the last 2 digits of the year you're born. So it's 8 and 4. So the police officer came up to me because I didn't have a cane, and I was actually working out at this time because I was trying to maintain the rest of my muscles in my body. And she's like, so you were born in 1948? And I'm like, no, I turned it around. So I was born in 1984. And she's like, oh, and then she ran it and she's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, it's fine. It happens all the time because it wasn't apparent at that time. So the thing with them, going back to your initial question, is that people right now, the previous generation that came, our parents, they had to establish the masajid. They had to establish the community. And that was their main primary goal. And they did an excellent job for it. Now I feel like this first generation Muslims born in this country that are having their children now, they have the platform to build on top of, to create awareness for people with disabilities, all type of awareness. Now you're seeing all these movements that are happening where sisters are getting more involved in the masajid. Children are becoming more inclusive in the masajid. So even people, we're like jumping into this opportunity, like, yes, and we also want to include people with disabilities because there is a huge movement. So what I feel masjids need to do is, number one, you need to get involved. I think one of the greatest, in my opinion, of the sunnahs of Rasulullah was that he understood his sahaba. He understood the people he was leading, right? And if you want to be able to lead a community, you need to understand the various types of people in your community. If there are people that have disability, learn about that disability. And the only way to do that is to ask a question. I always tell people when they go to the masjid, they get upset. Oh, we can't go for Eid, or we can't for Tarawih, we can't go for Jummah. They're going at times where it's very, very busy. I'm like, go during Dhuhr, Asr. Unfortunately, this is the reality of our community. Inshallah, will change that. It's not as busy during the week, during these, the other salahs. That's when I typically go to the masajid and speak to the imams. And that's how they get to know me. And I've built my relationship through those channels by letting them know, hey, I'm part of your community and this is what I have. And they've come to my house. I've spoken to them in their offices. I'm on text messages. So they're very much aware of my condition. So first and foremost, imams, I feel, need to start learning about the ummah that they're leading. And the second is the people need to start understanding the type of challenges you have and start working within the confines of the community. We're not perfect. We have our facilities are not perfect. We also lack and are limited in the amount of money we have as a community. Here, at least in Chicagoland, subhanAllah, there's so many masjids, but there's a double-headed sword with that. that we need the funding to manage all of these masjids as well and get all the accommodations as well. So I think it's two parts. I think just like everything, you need to work together. People, caretakers and those with disabilities need to work with the masajid, and the masajid need to be open to understanding the different needs of their community, and they shouldn't even hesitate. And I only bring that up because I was talking to another member of the MUHSEN team, and she was telling me that she had mentioned to an imam that she wants this to be a topic of a khutbah. And he replied and said, well, how many people is this truly impacting? And I understand on the face value that he's thinking, how many people is this impacting that have disabilities? And at first I defended him. I said, I guess he's right. There's bigger issues. People aren't praying. They're not, they're losing their iman. There's all these issues that are happening. And she was very smart and quick to make me understand that it's not a matter of disabilities. It's a matter of character. Character is the number one thing we need to build to be good Muslims. I'm not a scholar, so Sheikh Omer sitting here. I mean, if you disagree with me, feel free to jump in.
Well, speaking about character, you were not a very practicing Muslim before your diagnosis. And can you talk about that journey? How you came to being a more practicing Muslim as you were diagnosed and as you were struggling with your diagnosis?
Wow. Yeah, that's something that was a very long journey. SubhanAllah. It took me over 10 years to get there. At first, because I was raised in a very traditional Pakistani family in Take It As You May, but the issue is that we were practicing in the sense where we prayed Salah, we read Quran, we did Jummah, but we didn't understand the core of it, the Iman aspect of it, the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we did these practices as is like formalities or rituals. And I say that very openly in the sense where, and I'm not trying to say it in a disrespectful way, where if you're praying without understanding why you're praying and you don't know who you're praying towards, and these are things that are very dangerous. So I would pray and I would say, I'm doing all the right things as a Muslim. I'm a good Muslim. I pray, I pay my sadaqah, I do all these good things, I fast, and then boom, I got hit with a calamity. One day I'm, 17 years old, I'm playing ball with everybody, and the next day I'm different. I'm not the same as everybody else. And in my mind, I was a pretty good person. I mean, I never hurt anybody. I tried not to be a bad son or a bad friend or a bad brother. I was a pretty normal person. And all of a sudden I looked as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was testing me in a way through a punishment. I kept questioning, what did I do? I did this exercise for like 3 months where I would just keep going back. Who did I hurt? Who did I potentially say something to or do something to where Allah is punishing me for this? And it was a very difficult thing. And then the normal process of depression. Why is this happening to me? I was so angry. And you're angry at who? When things happen to someone and is attributed to another person, like you get in a car accident, somebody hit you. You go, okay, I'm mad at that person because they did this to me. Who did this to me? And in realistic terms, I had no one to point a finger at. So I was mad at my parents. I was mad at other friends that I had because in my mind, I was being judgmental. Like, they're not as good as I am, or they're worse than I am as a person or human being. Now, I don't even know, in their ins and outs, but I blamed, like, why didn't they get it? And then I also then ultimately came to the fact that I blamed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, why did he do this to me? It's just all the stuff that I've been hearing about love and mercy, all that this makes absolutely no sense. So character development comes from, I think, both aspects of it. Your tarbiyah as a child, this is another thing, going back to the MUHSEN thing. The more our children are exposed to other children that have special needs, the more their character is going to develop. And the other thing is, if I had that, in the beginning, it was just pray or do your Quran. It was never like, why are we doing this? And it was not until I got hit by a test by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guided me in His way to understand why this had to happen to me. I never would have seeked out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on my own.
What would you tell younger kids or anyone who's just been recently diagnosed with a disability? How do you tell yourself? Let's put it like this: How would you tell yourself if you could time travel back and give yourself some advice?
You know what, Tim? That's an amazing question. I honestly think if I would have traveled back right now, and show that Omer Zaman everything that I have now and I have learned today, he wouldn't listen. It was a matter of just being receptive. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I wanted to feel like the victim. I wanted the world to feel sorry for me. But at the same time, I had so much pride. When people did do things for me, I was like, no, I don't want your help. It was very conflicting emotions I was going through. Now, ideally, I would tell that person that you're not alone. You have to talk to other people that have some form of disability. You're not always going to go through the same challenges, because even if you might have the exact same diagnosis, your financial situation will be different. Your parents' situation will be different. There's different elements to everyone's life. But I wish I opened up to talking to other people. My mom and my father used to always say, Omer, go to these support groups and go talk to someone in the support group. And I would be like, no, they're not going to understand. And the reason behind that was because they were not Muslim. I was like, my issues are with faith, right? So because of that reason, I felt like they're never going to understand me. And that's another thing what MUHSEN is doing, which I really like, is that they're creating a support group for people that have special needs, that are Muslim, and they can understand not only the physical challenges, but the faith challenges that comes along with that, inshallah. And so number one, definitely talk to other people. Don't isolate yourself, because when you're alone with your thoughts and shaitan is there to reinforce those thoughts, you're in for a world of trouble. And number two, you need to accept the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a better plan ultimately. Now that is very difficult. That's why I said, if I went back to, 15 years, that person would have been like, I don't know what you're talking about, and you're crazy. And you might look like me, but you're fatter, and you're not me, Like, it would have been something like, I would have completely created a reason not to listen to that person. So the reality was that you have to keep that open-mindedness. And that comes from when I have children. My son's 7. I tell him now about, qadr of Allah. Like, things can change rapidly. You're going to get tested. I keep telling him that life is not supposed to be easy. Jannah is not meant to be easy. And my parents and my wife are like, are you crazy? You're scaring him. I'm like, he needs to understand this. And my experience and whatever little knowledge I have formulates my opinions. That's everybody. And the reality of it is that we have to start teaching our children about the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at a very young age. Because it's in the Quran that if you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you say that you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will be tested. Now, that's paraphrasing ayat, so I don't like doing that. So I'm going to send over Sheikh Amir here to correct me.
One beautiful thing before we even get into that, you were mentioning that you explained to your son the qadr of Allah. Now, coming from you, that's something that is amazing. And I'll tell you why. Izzuddin Abdus Salam has a book about the benefits of trials and tribulations, right? And the benefits and trials of tribulations, the first thing that it does is, number one, I think the first thing on his list was that it destroys arrogance and the tendency of arrogance itself when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you with something. Obviously, everyone's tested with different things, some more severe and some in less in severity, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, la yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha, right? Allah doesn't put anybody through a test unless they can handle it, right? Or that they're capable of handling it. So when you're explaining to your son, and this is why it reminded me, is that one of the benefits out of 20 benefits of trials and tribulations is that when somebody is also going through a trial and tribulation, you are going to be able to explain it to them and have rahmah on them. Number one, you're going to be able to explain to them, listen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a decree. The second thing you're going to be able to explain to them or share with them is the feeling of having that type of depression or being down, in that situation. Because a lot of people, they don't feel for other people when they're going through trials and tribulations. But somebody who's been through trials and tribulations, and especially someone who's been through an enormous trial and tribulation, now they can genuinely speak to somebody, right? And there's 2 levels of that. One level is, oh, you know what? Everything's going to be okay. Allah's going to take care of everything for you, right? That's one. The other is, you know what? Let's sit down and talk. And you wholeheartedly want to spend all night talking to this person. And you will probably lose sleep if you're trying to explain to that older Omer Zaman, for instance, and he's not understanding. You're probably going to lose sleep because now you actually genuinely want this person to understand and you love him for the sake of Allah, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even have to be a Muslim. It can be anybody. You genuinely see something, and you obviously have to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time, and there's many ways that somebody's benefiting from these trials and tribulations.
Omer, how was your family affected by this initially? I mean, we always talk about the disabled person and what they're going through, but tell us about how the family's feeling at this time.
You know, Sim, I think it was not until I became a father where I realized that the test was not, my test wasn't the hardest. It had to be from my parents. It was, my mom, she told me, you know, that 3 months prior to my diagnosis, she had a clean bill of health. Alhamdulillah. And 3 months after, she got diabetes because of the stress. And the tone of the house changed. People stopped talking. It wasn't happy anymore. People were just talking about the future. Who's going to marry him? What are we going to do for his future? How is he going to make money? You know, all of these things. And like I said to you, it's not that my parents didn't have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a natural reaction to something that changes your life. That's what they call it, a life-changing event. And they're trying to think about how to secure my future. And, you know, my mom and my dad, they were so worried about me that they were ready to kind of just put me, well, not so much my mom. My dad was ready to put me in a bubble. Don't do anything. We're going to take care of you. Let's get things figured out. And it was my mom who kind of pushed me to say, no, you know, you need to keep moving and you need to do as much as you can while you can still do it. That's actually, well, I got married when I was 20. That was one of the reasons I got married so young, is because they realized that, oh, he's not going to have the same luxury as other people where he can wait till he's 25 or 26. And on a side note, you know, when I was at the dinner, one of the things that MUHSEN mentioned was a matrimonial service for people with special needs. And the place erupted, literally erupted like Noman Khan walked into the room. It was nuts. Like people, I'm like, what's going on? I was looking at my cousin I was with him, and I was like, dude, I've been married for 10 years. You guys are sure they know what they're getting into? Just jokingly. But then I sat and actually reflected on it and said, SubhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me with a wife and 2 children. Allah, and these people, they were not young. You know, some of them are old, you know, late 30s, early 40s, even late 20s. And the horizon for them is very bleak. You're like, will I ever get married? And I know that, SubhanAllah, my parents saved me from that feeling by having the foresight of doing these type of things. But immediately they were talking about things that, to me at that point, were not relevant. I felt like, I'm 17. Why are you talking about me getting married? And why are you talking about my future? Worry about me right now. Why don't you guys ask how I'm feeling? And the other thing that came from that, Sim, which I felt, which added to the problems of Iman, was everybody asked about my physical needs. Nobody asked about my spiritual needs. Nobody even thought that I would question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, and I don't understand how you can't. There are people out there that are far greater than I am. The thing is, so I'm pretty confident there are people that haven't questioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for me, I feel like the first thing I would question is, why did this happen to me? And then you question your creator. Immediately, that's like the next question that comes after that. So my parents' reaction to it was, I would say that alhamdulillah, they did their best, but it came out of left field. No family history. I was playing basketball. I was doing I played ball with Sheikh Amir when I was younger, you know, and he was, you know, so he knows that I was an active person. And the reality is that I changed overnight. I wasn't like everyone else anymore. And it's so different in an environment where we're so competitive with jobs and getting married and the houses we have. And I literally felt like the competitive advantage, I just had none anymore. I was behind the 8 ball all the time. All my friends are going to be ahead of the game. And someone can think, why are you even thinking about that? Of course you're going to think about that. I got diagnosed right after high school. So what are you thinking about? College, career? Are you going to go to in-state college, out-of-state college? You know, you're not thinking about, am I going to be in a wheelchair in 4 years? So the mindset and the platform completely changed for me. And my parents didn't know what to do because they never even thought about this. There were small little signs that I had prior to even being diagnosed that inshallah I'll share before we leave here. So for anyone else that might have these signs, but they didn't think anything of it. Because I had the same symptoms throughout my days where my legs would hurt, they would burn, things like that. But then when I'm hanging out with you guys, I wouldn't really address them. I wouldn't care. I would just still hang out. But when it came to like doing vacuum or mowing the lawn, I was like, oh, you know, my legs are hurting or my legs are burning.
And I think you were mentioning, even when you were playing basketball, like you would jump and you said you wouldn't be able to jump and people would think that you just don't know how to jump.
Or no, he's being lazy.
Yeah, I'm not hustling.
You're not hustling.
You know, and I'm like, I am jumping though. Like, it was very difficult. I couldn't jump over a credit card, literally. But I wouldn't be able to do anything. But in my mind, I'm like, because to me, that's normal. I don't know what it feels like to be in somebody else's body, right? So whatever I've experienced up to this point is this is how everyone.
You need to have a pep talk with some 7-footers in basketball who refuse to jump.
Seriously, man, they were blessed. No, the reality was that so when I would start even playing sports, in my mind, I'm like, man, I'm jumping so high, and I wish I could actually have like that out of body experience and see what I was actually doing.
Yeah.
And it's like he's just sliding his feet around. Like, no, but the reality was that my parents would just like, you're just being lazy. You know, you don't want to do this work. You know, when you want to go with your friends, you're gonna go with your friends. And you know, I was hiding a lot of that pain when I was hanging out with my friends. I wouldn't mention it. You know, I just took some ibuprofen, moved on with my day. But that's why it didn't make sense to my parents. That one, you know, half the day you're fine, and the other half, when we ask you to do anything, you're not fine. So I think communication is very important at that point. But realistically, my parents were amazing. We still till this day have discussions and talk sometimes about the what ifs. Like, what if we caught this early? What if we talked about it more? And alhamdulillah, now we've gotten to that point where we kill it. I tell them that, my parents ask forgiveness of me. Can you imagine that? You know, I'm your parents coming to you and say, we're sorry, you know, that we didn't catch this earlier. And to me, that is like, what? It was mind boggling. How many of us can say that your parents come to you and apologize? SubhanAllah. And it's something I remember when my legs used to hurt, I would lie down in bed, and my nani, so that for those that don't know what that means, my mother's mother would sit at the foot of the bed and she would press my legs. For a grandson, that is very difficult to have your grandmother press your legs.
Wow.
And I would pull my legs away, and she's like, "No, you need to let me do this." You know, look at her, grant her Jannah. She passed away a few years ago, but still, these are the type of things my family went through. You know, and it was very hard for them to not accept it, but figure out, you know, what to do next.
At what point? I'm sure there's no way there's no finality to getting over a hurdle, but when was the major progression where you finally stopped blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and, you know, kind of started moving on with your life?
That was, wow.
How long did it take?
It took me 11 years.
Wow.
11 years, yeah, subhanAllah. So I have it, I'm going on 4 years now, mashallah, where I've gotten past that part.
Yeah.
And just to add some color, at that point when I was still doubting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I was having problems, I was married. And I did have a son. So one of the biggest fears that my parents also had was that my negativity towards my Lord would not rub off on my child. Because I wasn't actively practicing Islam at the time because I was so frustrated. And, you know, little things like, oh, what's the point? My wudu doesn't count because I can't, you know, put my foot in the sink and clean my toes or whatever. Or I can't make proper sujood. You know, I haven't made sajda in 8 years properly. I haven't put my head on the floor. So to me, it's like, well, I'm not, and people, when you hear things like, oh, you know, you're closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you do sujood. And I'm like, well, there you go. I'm out of the picture. Right? Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invites those to Umrah or Hajj, and I'm not able to go. So I feel like I went to Umrah when I was in 2002, and I haven't been able to go back for physical reasons. Wallahi, I feel like I'm boycotted from Makkah and Medina. Like in my heart, when people go, oh, I'm going to Umrah or Hajj, I'm like, it's like Allah has boycotted me from His house. And it's very painful. So those type of emotions, when you're alone and you're not talking to people, it adds up in you, and shaitan reinforces it. Yeah. Over and over and over. There's not a point where you feel like you're accepted in this deen, right? So in your mind, if this is the qualifications for Islam, and I can't meet them, then Islam cannot be the perfect religion, right? Logically, if it doesn't fulfill all the needs of all the followers of the world, then it can't be perfect. That was because of the lack of knowledge that I had at the time. It was not until about 3 or 4 years ago I actually came to a comfortable level with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, you know, it wasn't even on purpose. It was it was an important and it was a milestone in my life where I was depressed to the point where I wanted to die. Now, I'm not suicidal. I'm not going to go drink Clorox or something like that. I'm a coward, you know, I'm not going to go do stuff like that. I'm not an atheist. That has to be cleared up too. I was not an atheist. I believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the existence of Allah. I just thought I was not in the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So I'm thinking, you know, I kind of separated from all types of ibadah at that time. And I was talking to my mom, and I was so depressed. I had a beautiful family, had everything going for me, and I was still sad every day. And I was crying. I'm 27 or 26. My numbers are all off. I remember, and I was crying to her, and I was telling her, I just want to die. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. And what's the point? You know, I struggle. I haven't, you know, I pray and I've asked for shafa over and over again. It's not coming. There's absolutely no light at the end of this tunnel. Everybody else is living their lives. Everybody else is taking vacations. Everybody else is doing what they need to do. And, you know, I sometimes get embarrassed at that time to take my son to the park because I didn't want kids to laugh at my son that he had a handicapped father.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that would go through my head where shaitan would keep me away from my own child. Be like, you're going to embarrass your son. Don't go to parent teacher conference because other children will see you and they'll mock your child. And I would do conference calls instead. You know, alhamdulillah, I've gotten past that, but it was something in my head. So I went to my mom. I'm like, I'm done. You know, I just want him to, I cannot quote unquote defeat Allah. Na'udhu billah. And he's beaten me and I can't do this anymore. And I just want to die. And I want him to take my life. And she looked at me, and this is something that I will never forget. She said, that is probably the most arrogant thing I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, you know, how is this arrogant in any manner? I'm telling you, I'm lost. So how is that arrogance? You know, I just want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take me and just be done with me. And she said, because you think you're going to go to Jannah when you die.
Wow.
So my mom the entire time is thinking, you know, I'm watching you, you know, and I'm seeing that you're not praying, you're not fasting the way you're supposed to be fasting. You know, I was just not eating, to be honest. And all that you could just see that you're not doing things to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, this is not the life we aspire for. And that when we die, there's Jannah or Jahannam. And it was not, I'm sure it wasn't easy for her to say that, but she was being very real. And she said, you're going to go to hell if you keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, all right, if I have to deal with hell here, I'm not going to have to deal with hell there. So I just started doing the general trying to pray 5 times a day, you know, doing whatever I can, listening to lectures, reading a little bit of Quran. I actually went back to the alphabets of the Quran, learning the letters and the pronunciations with one of my friends and going through that from the pretty much grassroots, just coming from the fundamentals of Islam. And I started reading Quran more. And from that moment, something happened. SubhanAllah. I can't put my finger on a specific date or time, but I started reading more and I started liking Islam more. And then there was an ayat, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, in Surah Al-Furqan, it talks about Ibad al-Rahman, the people who Allah loves. And one of them is someone who genuinely fears Jahannam. And I was like, whoa, so you're saying I have a chance, you know, there's a chance that for me to go to Jannah too. Allah can love me just because I fear the Jahannam. And after that, when you start listening to more lectures and you start seeing the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which were always there from the beginning, I just didn't take the time to learn. And when I started to learn more about the prophets and the Sahaba, I started learning about them. I started learning about the struggles of Rasulullah himself. I mean, you know that these were the most beloved people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that made me feel a little bit better about myself, you know, at the end of the day, subhanAllah. So with knowledge and with a little bit of, I guess, patience in the sense where I was trying to gain a little bit of more understanding towards the deen, I get closer to it.
Who gave you the most inspiration from all the Sahaba you studied and the prophets and their lives you studied? Who gave you the most resolve?
Wow, you know, to me, that is a very interesting question because it changes every time I learn about a new Sahaba, right? So like every time you hear about a Sahaba, you're like, wow, you know, that was awesome, or I feel like I'm just that way. And I think there were 2 Sahabi that really got to me. From a spirituality standpoint and from an accepting standpoint, it was Ammar bin Yasir, and I'll expand on that. And then from a action standpoint, it was Abdullah bin Amr bin As. Right? Because let me go back to Ammar bin Yasir was someone, we all know his story. His parents were martyrs. They were tortured by Abu Jahl and his clan. They died in Mecca, and Ammar bin Yasir himself was tortured. And in that torture, in that time of distress, and I don't know the exact words he used, but he denounced Rasulullah. I believe he even called him a liar, even though in his heart he didn't believe it, but it was just, he went through so much at that time. He
had to free himself from that torture, yeah.
And he ran through the streets of Mecca after he was freed. And Abu Jahl was the greatest enemy of Islam at the time, and he was bragging about getting one of the closest Sahaba, one of the earliest Sahaba to say this about Rasulullah. And then you hear about the stories of Bilal ibn Rabah, who was everyone is praising, right? So imagine just being in those circles of Sahaba later in Medina and even in after Fatih Makkah, and people are talking about those days. You can naturally say that people praise Bilal radiallahu anhu for his strength at that time. Now, if Ammar radiallahu anhu is sitting there, can you imagine how he felt psychologically? That he at that moment didn't have the same, maybe he broke down, Allahu Alam, but how can a human being not be affected by that? And for me, for the things I said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the things I said about the faith of Allah, the deen of Allah and the ummah of Rasulullah, and I said all these things and I never had that reassurance even to today while I pray. The reason I cry is because of those words I said years back against my Lord. And I can't imagine that Ammar bin Yasir ever got past that point. I mean, I'm sure he did, because you have to believe in the faith of Allah and the mercy of Allah. But at the same time, Rasulullah just hearing about how much he praised Ammar bin Yasir, I kind of put two and two together myself. Now, I'm not a scholar, but I'm saying Rasulullah was perfect, and he understood that Ammar needed this. He needed me to tell him over and over again that, don't worry, you're good. I love you. I love you. And not only to him, but publicly he announced it so many times. And he was a prominent Sahaba that was really loved. The other Sahaba I mentioned was Abdullah bin Amr bin As, who was the son of Amr bin As. And he came to Islam late. I think he came in either the 7th or 8th year of Hijrah. He joined the Muslims. And it was before his father, if I'm not mistaken. But he was doing so much to catch up to the other Muslims. And he was just doing more and more when it came to fasting and recitation of Quran. Like and in 2 rak'ah, he would, read the entire Quran. Or he got in his, I don't remember the exact narration, but his wedding night, when his wife was following him in 2 rak'ah, he read, I think, all of Baqarah, Ali Imran. Like he read very extended, the rest of us reading like Surah Ikhlas and Surah Nas, but he read all these very long surahs. He just wanted to catch up to the rest of Sahaba. And it was a lot of those amazing hadith that we hear and are all amazing about slowing down and taking your time. That comes from Abdullah bin Amr bin As's interaction with Rasulullah. So I'm always, because I look at you guys, mashallah, I look at all my other friends and I'm like, man, the prime years when you're 20, 21 and you're learning about deen, they had that. Me, I lost it because I was dealing with my own test and my psychological breakdowns at that point. So I'm trying to catch up to everybody else. So even when I'm talking about Islam, I get very excited like I'm like a 5-year-old, and other people like, man, we already know this. Yeah, we know there's 5 prayers a day, Omer, like I'm getting like very excited about little things. And subhanAllah, these are the 2 Sahaba that I would probably relate myself most to when it comes to their individual struggles, and definitely not their virtues.
Yeah.
No, and is that where your passion for Islamic history, history in general, you're very passionate about history, but was that the birth of your love for Islamic history? And I'm pretty sure that's what helped you cope with a lot of stuff, because if you have a passion about something and you excel in it, it helps you a lot coping with that stuff, right? So is that basically how you got so passionate about history?
Well, one of the things that that helped me move forward is understanding the lives of the prophets. Now, why is that important? It's just like it's important to go to programs where you're talking to other people with disabilities or similar challenges. When you learn about other people's struggles and their lives, you start relating to them, it makes you feel more normal. If that's a word, you feel more normal in the sense where you're not alone. And when I heard about, for me, the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and Ayyub alayhi salam were so moving for me. It's particularly Ayyub alayhi salam. And there's not a lot mentioned about him in the Quran. There is a lot in the hadith and the Israeliyat that talk about him. But just the challenges where everything was taken from him, and through his patience, everything was given back. And not only just given back like in equal levels, it was given back it was multiplied. And one of the things that I've heard, and I don't know the narration of this exactly, so Allah Alam, if it's authentic, but he was afflicted by some challenges by being tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his wife had said, why don't you make dua to Allah to cure you, to free you of these tests? He goes, I had all these blessings for X amount of years. Let's just say he had blessings for 30 years. He goes, it wouldn't be right for me to ask to be relieved of these tests unless I was tested for at least 30 years. For it to be even. And I started asking immediately. Like, as soon as I got diagnosed, I'm crying, I'm getting mad. I still remember I was making dua for like 4 months. And I'm like, oh, Allah's not listening to me, and I gave up. But then you hear the story of Nuh alayhi salam, who did dawah for 950 years. Right? And like, oh my God.
Wow.
Right? So I think the important thing is when we learn about it is to kind of, we can't just sit there. This is the problem. That we go, oh, that was the prophets, or that was the Sahaba. They were sent as examples. That's why we need to make these correlations.
They weren't angels.
Exactly. And one of the things that even, I'm maybe going off topic, but a lot of in the Christian faith, where they kind of brought the prophets down to their level. They said, they found Noah drunk in a cave, or they saw Lut do, other things, right? They say, hey, see, they're just like us, and we are allowed to do, bad things because the prophets did bad things, Yeah. And for us, we have to think the exact, we can try to aspire to that level. We'll never get there, but that's purely because they were chosen to be prophets. But we have to go no way are we ever, inshallah, going to bring our prophets down to our level, but that doesn't give us an excuse to stay where we are.
Exactly.
And you know what the beautiful thing about what you mentioned is that, yes, the prophets, they've been through many sicknesses, they've been through many trials, they've been through many tribulations, but what amazing hadith that just came to mind as soon as you mentioned that is in Sahih al-Bukhari. There's an amazing hadith that actually describes what you were going through at the age of 17 and in that phase where you're mentioning age of 26 is in Kitab al-Marda, which means the book of sicknesses, or the book of patience, meaning not patience of being patient, but being a patient, like visiting a doctor, right? It's called the book of patience. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions an amazing hadith. He says something where he says, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the hadith memorized, but he mentions that if, because of the severity of your sickness, you wish death upon yourself, and the reason why he mentions that is because sicknesses can get so severe, the human, by default, he's going to ask for death because it gets so severe. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam understands that. That's why he's saying in such a generous way. Then he says, say this dua, oh Allah, give me life back to me. Right? And I can't remember the exact hadith, but we can put in the description, inshallah. But the reason why he's mentioning that is actually human nature to think of death when something gets so severe and you actually want death. How many times we hear people on surgical tables when they're like, you know what, just kill me because I can't take the pain anymore, right? And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's letting us know, yes, the prophets, they didn't think like that, but we understand because Allah put us as prophets through trials and tribulations. So when you do think of death, because that's going to cross your mind and it may be natural, right? Then you ask Allah to give you life again, right? So that's something that if anybody actually is going through any trials and tribulations and you're asking, Allah to give you death, number one, you should know it's not that far-fetched for a human being to think that way, but you should obviously never do that dua again, or you should never put yourself in harm's way to cause death, obviously. And may Allah protect us all. Amen. But that's something that is the beautiful thing about the prophets. They went through all the trials, but they never asked for death. But when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was telling his ummah about trials, he told them, I know you guys are going to ask for death, but don't do it. And if you do it, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you life again, right? Yeah, man. So it's crazy how everything works out,
Omer, I want to close this podcast. What are some things that everyday Muslims can do to help Muhsens? They might not be handicapped, but what can they do to help other handicapped people around them?
Well, MUHSEN is one of some. There are other groups that are helping those that have disabilities. So get involved wherever you can get involved. And number one is trying to do your part. Now, what I mean by that is everyone, when they're rushing to the masajid to do Jama'ah, or they're trying to get somewhere, everyone thinks that their objective is the most important objective. And we all have that. It's not just, people that are not disabled. Other people are like that as well. People that with special needs are like that as well. At least I am. We need to stop for a minute and say, I can't park here because I'm not disabled, or I can make this difficult for somebody else. Even though I might miss a rak'ah of Jummah, I can't leave my shoes here because somebody, not just with disabilities, but elderly, might fall and can't get to where they need to get to. That's the number one thing. Stop for a second. We live in a world that's moving so fast. But ultimate destination is Yawm al-Qiyamah and death. We're not going to surpass that. That's going to be the end of it for all of us. We need to slow down for 1 minute. And I know that's a little bit of a broader answer, but the reality of it is that's where it starts, when we start thinking of other people. And then the other thing is more fighting and standing with other organizations that they don't need to be Muslim. One of the things Mohsen is participating in is the Autism Speaks Walk in Chicago, which is not a Muslim organization. It is. I just looked at the list a few hours ago. Thousands of people are participating. Hundreds of groups, and they're all different denominations and all different types of people. We need to get integrated with the world. We got to stop this only with Muslim stuff.
Yeah.
And you know what that means? Go to synagogues, go to churches, go to temples, and find out what are they doing to make their places more inclusive. What technologies are available? Learn. I mean, Rasulullah he also learned from Salman al-Farsi what the Battle of Khandaq, right? That was a Persian way of fighting or a strategy. It was foreign to the Arab, meaning it's nothing wrong with taking advice from people that are not of the same religion, culture, or background. Another aspect of it is that, going back to the original thing, I feel the people move in the direction of their imam. If your imam is talking about this on the pulpit, then people are listening to it. I can stand up or roll up and say, this is what you guys need to do. And they're going to be like, well, you're not important. Like, maybe I mentioned a bunch of hadith here, or a bunch of maybe some ayahs, and someone's going to be like, listen, you're not a scholar, so I'm automatically negated that he probably doesn't know what he's talking about. We got to look up, see how authentic it is. But if a imam is saying this, it's something that it really touches the heart. Because the reality of it is that the imams that become more sensitive to this and start talking about it more, they're helping develop a Muslim, their character. Yeah. Because at some point in our lives, we're dealing with someone that's disabled. I'll give an example. Either an infant or an elderly person.
Yeah.
Right? There's a point where a child can't talk, a point where a child can't walk, a point where a child can't feed themselves, and you're dealing with it, right? There's a point where adults stop, then your father and mother become not, I hate to use this word, but they become a burden on you at some point, right? Financial burden on you, because it's not easy to take care of them. They get sick, they're medicine, they can't walk, they can't go to the bathroom, they can't function anymore, and you're helping them. So when the community starts to develop a mentality, not just towards special needs, but just caring, then it affects everybody. Then children become more inclusive. Then adults become, elderly become more inclusive, and innately people with special needs become more inclusive.
Omer, what's the best way to reach out to Mohsen? Are they nationwide or just
nationwide? Yeah, okay. info.mohsen.org is the email address. You can go to mohsen.org for their website. They're on all social media. They have a YouTube page. One thing I would tell everyone to do is go on their YouTube page and check out the speech was given at the dinner last year by Sister Sarah, who is a sister that has been tested with blindness, and she is doing amazing work out there. Mufti Kamani gave an amazing speech on Surah Ad-Duha. Please check that out. And anything that you can start learning, you start seeing the different pictures from the projects that are taking place that Muslims involved in. And really, just if you're an imam at a masjid, every masjid has a distribution list, an email distribution list. Send out the link, reach out to Mohsen, get certified, and we will try our best, inshallah, as a group, as a volunteer group, to help move it along. However, it's something that people need to be willing to do, and Mohsen is, I can't speak for the entire group, but I know one thing: it's catching fire, alhamdulillah, and volunteers are needed, and the more enthusiastic, active volunteers you have in any organization, it's going to flourish.
Yeah, inshallah. I saw an MSA National speech just recently on YouTube, and there were sign language interpreters, and it was really heartening to see that the Muslim community is actually taking the special needs initiatives more seriously.
And Muhsen is spelled MUHSEN, right?
Correct.
MUHSEN, yes.
Correct.
And what's their website?
It's www.mohsen.org.
Okay.
So, that's it. Jazakallah khair again, guys.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair, Rosie, for taking the time and coming and speaking with us. And you continue to be an inspiration in everyone's lives, whether you know it or not. You propel all of our imams every time we meet you, and you help us tackle the next
trial,
week. Everything.
Yeah, I think just one thing before I leave: if anyone ever feels a need to reach out or need to speak to someone, reach out to the Mamluks. They know where to get, to get a hold of me, and inshallah, they'll get me in touch. And if you're ever in a conference meeting, stay by the door.
For anyone interested in in sending us a letter or writing to us. You can reach us at dmadmamluks at gmail.com, THEMADMAMLUKS at gmail.com. We also have a Twitter and Facebook handle at dmadmamluks. Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum.